Okay, good evening, everyone. We shall begin our second installment of our four-part series, Our Holy Land. Today, we are going to discuss Chevron. I want to dedicate this shiur in honor of my grandmother's upcoming first yahrzeit, Arlene Klein, Anna Miriam Bas Shmuel. And I guess like many of the cities of our Holy Land, there's a drama that is underlying the whole story that may not be able to be captured exactly, but we'll try to point to it and try to bring out some of the, I guess you could call it the, as we said by Tzfat, the mystery, the mystique, and the Kedusha, the holiness of these amazing cities. So as I mentioned, tonight is Chevron. There are a number of fascinating articles that I found through my research from the early days of the publication of these were a long time ago. And I'll start with one. It's very interesting, the backstory to this. I don't even know the whole story, but there was an article published in the 1930s in the Southern Israelite, which was a publication that was published out of Augusta, Georgia, and it was written by Rabbi Lazarus Axelrod, and he attended the yeshiva in Chevron, and he has I think just a beautiful depiction of the city and the yeshiva. I should also note that on the front, some people were discussing the pictures. I tried to give you a nice amount of pictures this time. The top is a rendering, a painting of the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. You'll see it looks pretty similar to what it looks like today. And then the other picture is a picture of the Chevron Yeshiva, Knesset Yisrael. As we shall learn about, the Slobodka Yeshiva in Lithuania moved in the 1920s to Chevron. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that as well. Many people think that the larger building with the sign and the Hebrew lettering, which says, if you could look closely, it says Knesset Yisrael, many people mistakenly think that that was the yeshiva building. In fact, the shorter one-story building on the left is the yeshiva. The ground floor of the taller building served as the Beis HaMusar, a room designated for study of Musar, ethical study. And the top was actually the altar of Slobodka, Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel's home. We'll learn more about the story of the Chevron Yeshiva and, unfortunately, the tragic massacre in 1929 that struck the yeshiva and caused the entire community of Chevron to really, the Jewish community, to leave. But let's talk a little bit about before that. So, as I mentioned, Rabbi Lazarus Axelrod, he says as follows in this amazing article. I didn't know anything about the Southern Israelite before this, so it's just a fascinating thing. You could see it has, advertisements in this journal in like the 1920s and 30s, and it says, Philadelphia hotel, a room for one night, $5. Like it's just crazy, $5. The only hotel that opens into the subway or something like that, or the train station. It's just like very, very historical. So he writes, this is Axelrod. Probably outside of Chevron, little is known of the inner life of the yeshiva. It's interesting, he spells it yeshiba. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe that's more academic. I don't know. I haven't seen it in most publications today. Which about 4 years ago was transferred by degrees from Lithuania to the Holy Land. It was made up of approximately 170 youth. So this is probably being written around 1929 because the yeshiva just moves around 1925. So he writes that well-versed in Talmudic lore, referring to the youths in the yeshiva, carefully selected from the fruitful fields of Eastern Europe, youths that adequately to describe their respective merits would necessitate writing a separate book for each of them. High up on the hills of Judea, at an altitude of nearly 3,000 feet above sea level, an important feature in these tropical climates, within close proximity to the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the tomb of the patriarchs, in the most ancient of cities, possessing an unrivaled climate, and where all is bathed in glorious sunshine. No more ideal spot, both physical and spiritual, could have been chosen for the seat of learning, the greatest Talmudic center in the world. And he talks about how this modest building, simple as the building is externally, yet more simple is the interior. Yet, I'm just skipping a little ahead, yet though the building and its content do not exactly represent an art gallery, the lack of artificial beauty is amply repaid by the breathtaking panorama to be seen through the open windows, in uninterrupted view of the picturesque Emek, the valley of Chevron, with its fields and vineyards resplendent in their new spring dress of yellow and green, the ripening corn and the sesame, the pomegranate in bloom, displaying its exquisite scarlet cup-shaped blossom, an occasional Arab peasant tilling his field, driving his primitive plowshare through the fertile soil with the aid of his eternal pair of oxen, leaving the neat furrows in his wake, the quaint shepherd boy mustering his wandering flocks to the tune of his flute-like reed, the enchanting strains of that Eastern music floating through the pure air in the distance, as though to crown this fair miniature paradise, the hills of Judea looming up majestically. The scenic beauty has indeed a most beneficial effect on the student as he pores over the pregnant page. We realize the importance of the maxim, Avira da'ara d'Yisrael machkim. The atmosphere of Eretz Yisrael is enlightening. Just a few more excerpts as you see. It's just a beautiful depiction of what life was like in the early 1920s in Chevron. Alert, quick-witted, of cheerful disposition. Debonair. I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation. Yeah, debonair. And immaculately dressed. The Chevron Yeshiva Bacher makes a most pleasing impression on all. Yet, though superficially his appearance tells of a carefree college student, as you'll see the pictures of what college students used to look like in the 1920s, they have, colorful hats, suits, ties, very, as he says, immaculately dressed. So he says, although it looks like a carefree college student, he is complete master of himself, having studied for years diligently and thoughtfully the art of conquering his inner self and controlling his train of thoughts. He labors, I'm skipping a few lines, labors with unflagging zeal, thinking of nothing of putting in 12 hours or so a day of persistent study and deep concentration, ever seeking to satiate his thirsty soul that longs and yearns for that priceless spiritual treasure which appears so near and yet so unattainable, delving deeply into this fathomless sea of the Talmud. And then he says, in the summer, this is a little bit faded out here, they study in white, an array of white suit and pajama hats slightly tilted, and you can see pictures of that in your pamphlet. And my heart swells with pride. This American, he's not American, he's actually originally from Liverpool, Axelrod, who studied there for years. He writes, so he swells with pride to think that I am part and parcel of them, a boy among the boys. And he talks about, which we'll get to a little bit, the lore of this Abraham's eshel, or oak tree, where legend has it, the patriarch pitched his tent, right? Abraham pitched his tent, prepared the feast for his three angelic guests, which is in this week's Parsha. So that's one article, one depiction, a beautiful window into Chevron in 1920s. Another letter. My dearest mother, you ask me in your letter to tell you something about Chevron. Well, I shall do my best, but bear in mind that my piecemeal description will fall short of doing Chevron justice. As I wrote previously, the city of Chevron is situated amongst the mountains of Judah, famous in biblical history and dear and sacred to Jewish hearts. Driving by automobile from Jerusalem, that is the only means of transportation beside the donkeys, you are thrilled at the beauty of graceful hills and valleys. Everything is golden brown and very deep and green. And even though the sun is quite strong, as only the oriental sun is, you are forced to remove your sunglasses by the sheer natural scenic beauty. I tell you, in your wildest flights of imagination, you could not picture Palestine. And to crown your sensations, you are ever aware that you are treading on holy ground, that you are breathing holy air. This you say over and over again, to yourself is the land given as a divine gift to our ancestors. This is the land from which religion and civilization spread to the rest of the world, the light of spirituality, Zion. This is the land of prophecy, the land where the divine presence, the Shekhinah, rested in the Holy of Holies in our sacred temple. These sentiments and more are ever in your mind and heart here in Palestine. You would think that familiarity would wear off the enthusiasm, but it does not. Quite the contrary, and especially are you in a state of constant inspiration here in Chevron. Just think, here within 10 minutes walk is the cave of the Machpelah, where the Arba Zugos, the 4 couples, lie buried. Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah. In the Zechus, merit, of the patriarchs, we live under divine light and protection. History adds it that such as the Ramban, Baal Reishis HaChachma, and others are also laid to rest here in Chevron, since Jewish tradition tells us that the resurrection will begin here. Therefore, Avram named this place Chevron, meaning the joining, the reuniting of the body and soul. I will get to many of these points that he mentions in this letter, and we'll see some of the sources as well. But still, I have told you nothing about Chevron, have I? But I shall leave that for tomorrow, if time will allow. This letter was written by Aaron David Scheinberg, or often referred to by his friends as Dave Scheinberg, who's an American boy, 22 years old, from Memphis, Tennessee. He was about 1 out of 20. He was 1 out of 20 of the 20 or so students who were American students studying in the Chevron Yeshiva at that time. It's hard to really imagine this, but there was a strong contingency, even in the 20s, of American boys. So we saw Lazarus Axelrod, who was from England. Later on, goes on to have a career in the rabbinate in America. They rub shoulders. These American boys, we'll see Billy, Jackie, Dave, all these boys, the gang they call them. They rub shoulders with the greatest of the great Talmudic scholars from Lithuania who were transplanted from Lithuania to Chevron. It's just hard to even understand how these two cultures, how they were able to get, thrive together, but they did. People like Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein, who was the Rosh Hashiva, Rav Yitzchak Hutner as a student was there, Rav Leib Chasman, who was the Mashkiach, Rav Yecheskel Sarna, who later on becomes the Rosh Hashiva of Chevron. Now, the terrible end of Dave's story, as I alluded to before, is that in 1929, he was murdered in the infamous 1929 Chevron massacre. And we will return to that whole story and how to try to make some sense of it in light of this, I would call it, beautiful and maybe tragic city. And how do we understand, I can't explain it. A tragedy is a tragedy, and we don't understand. God understands. However, we can gain an appreciation of what the Torah has to say about Chevron and understand how there's a deep connection that we have even in the state of destruction that sometimes we see happening in Chevron. So let's begin a little bit of the Torah sources. We saw these depictions of Chevron in the 20s, and let's start to unpack it. I think tonight we're not going to jump around to different periods, but what we will do is we'll focus on the story of the Chevron massacre, tragic story, and we also will tie in, God willing, I guess we could call it the Torah sources. In light of the Torah sources, we'll try to understand the history. So it'll kind of be a blend of history and Torah tonight. So we are told in Parsha Shalach, before the whole debacle of the Meraglim, the spies were sent to the land of Israel to scout it out, and Kalev and Yehoshua are the 2 out of the 12 who have the right approach, and we are told that Kalev goes to pray somewhere. And Rashi tells us, you can take a look in your source sheet number 4, that he goes, the pasuk says, Vayavo b'negev vayavo ar Chevron. They went up to the Negev and came to Chevron. It says Vayavo ar Chevron, which seems to imply that there was an individual who went there, and Rashi says that individual was Kalev. Why did he go to Chevron? V'neshtateach al kivrei avos, to pray on the graves or to prostrate himself in the graves of the avos. And so many explain, and this is based on the Gemara in Sota, Daf Lamed Daled, and he prayed so that he would not be swayed by the Atzis Meraglim, by the approach or the counsel of the other spies. So what question that you have to ask yourself about this story, and this is going to, again, open up a whole picture as to what does Chevron stand for, is why would Kalev go to Chevron? If I was going to a holy place to pray, where would I go? Yerushalayim. We know Yaakov Avinu goes to sleep, and he doesn't realize it, and he travels past the place, and he wakes up. There was a whole story, right? He's on his way, and then he passes the place, and then there's Kfitzas HaDerech, and Hashem brings him back to the place of Hara Moriah. And then he goes to sleep, and he wakes up, and he says that this is Ein Zeh Ki Im Beis Elokim Shar Shemayim. And the explanation is, this is the gate of heaven, and Yaakov Avinu says this is the place where our forefathers prayed, and he's referring to Yerushalayim. So if I want to find a place to pray, why does Kalev go to Chevron?
You want to be strengthened by the
we're gonna develop an answer, but I'm just putting it out there that I'm curious to hear your explanation, but we'll tie it into a lot of the other questions that we're going to ask. What's your suggestion?
He wants to be strengthened by the patriarchs somehow.
Well, the patriarchs themselves prayed at Jerusalem. Yaakov prays because Abraham prayed.
Right, no, I appreciate
so
that.
why?
Yeah.
If you just work backwards from David, no one knew where the place was. So for as much as Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov knew where it was, if you work backwards, there was a time where that Har Moriah was lost. They didn't know where that place was. So who says after the 40 years, who says they actually knew where it was?
And he knows where Ma'aras HaMachpelah is?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know.
They had a tradition. You're saying they had a tradition where that was, but they didn't know where Jerusalem would be. It's possible.
Well, Machpelah was established at the time of the patriarchs, whereas Jerusalem was established by King David.
Right, you're saying that it wasn't yet. Okay, interesting. It seems to be that at certain times in history, they went to Jerusalem, or they went to Har Moriah, or they intended to go there, but Kalev goes straight for Chevron. Another interesting source is, it's referred to in the Torah, in Parshas Chayei Tamas Sarah passes away, B'Kiryas Arba. In Kiryas Arba, He Chevron Be'eretz Canaan. What does it mean, Kiryas Arba? So Rashi cites two explanations. The first explanation is, Ashem Arba Anakim Shahayusham. There were 4 giants who lived there. Achiman, Sheshai, V'Salmai, V'Avihen. These 4 giants. Dover Acher, another explanation, Ashem Arba Zugos, for the 4 pairs, Nikbaru Sham, Ish V'Ishto, Adam V'Chava, Avram V'Sara, Yitzchak, V'Rivka, Yaakov, Leah. This was referred to by Dave Scheinberg in his letter to his mother in 1928. So, he doesn't refer to the first explanation of Rashi, but that's what I want to draw your attention to. What is the significance? It's really a medrash. What is the significance of these 4 giants? These giants were seemingly powers of great negative spiritual power. So why are we even referring to the city of Chevron based on these negative characters? We think it's a holy city. Kalev goes to pray there. Maybe he didn't know, someone suggested, Dr. Nussbaum suggested that he didn't know where the holy site of Jerusalem was. But either way, he goes there to pray. So seemingly it's a holy place. And we know that there's the 4 zugos, the 4 pairs, Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. So I don't understand. Is it a holy place? Is it not a holy place? And why would we even care that there are these 4 giants there? Another fascinating thing, Mishnah Yuma writes that when did they start the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, when the temple stood? When did they start the day's service? They say after they're told, Heir Pnei Kol HaMizrach Ad Shechevron, until the light, the entire eastern sky is illuminated by the light over Chevron. And the Bartanura explains over there that because that's the time, Zman Uzeh, also Na'om Din Lamata Sholin Lo, those who stand below, they ask him, Higya Or La Chevron, did the light reach Chevron? V'Umeshiv Hein, he says yes. Why are we waiting to start the service in Jerusalem until the light is shining on Chevron? in order to invoke the merit of our forefathers. We mentioned Chevron. And oftentimes Chevron is referred to as the Ir HaAvos, the city of the patriarchs. So it's very odd. I would assume, okay, maybe they didn't know where Jerusalem was, or maybe for whatever reason he needed the strength of the Avos to fortify him. Fine. But once we have the temple, once we have Jerusalem, why are we somehow still looking to Chevron to wait to begin the avodah, to begin the service in Jerusalem? Because of the Avos, the patriarchs. What does that mean? Another interesting fact. How do we know that, we give a ring underneath the chuppah? We say that the tradition is, how do we know that effectuates a marriage with two kosher witnesses? Does anybody know? The first Gemara in Maseches Kiddushin, that we learn it out, Kicha Mistei Ephron. We learn out this homiletical exegesis is based on the language, and using the language of take, and using the language of take by marriage as well. So just like Abraham purchases a piece of land in the land of Israel, so too, when you get married, you can use money or coins or a ring. So, a very strange place to derive the concept of marriage from. Buying a burial plot from a sinister, evil man. That's how we learn it out. Very romantic. I don't understand. What is the significance? Everything has meaning and purpose. We found this occurrence in the Torah that Abraham purchases this land in the land of Israel. That's how we learn that you can use a ring or money or whatever to effectuate marriage. Seemingly very, very strange. Again, what does this have to do with Kiddushin, with marriage? To explain all this, we will return to a passage from Rav Moshe Wolfson in Emunas Yitacha. Rav Moshe Wolfson passed away about a year ago. He was the long-time mashgiach in Yeshivas Torah V'das in Brooklyn. And he also had a shul. I think he called it Emunas Yitacha. Very, very interesting, fascinating thinker. I don't know so much about him, but this piece that I put all the acknowledgments to all the works that I used to prepare for this year. So two different people who I listened to quoted from this essay about Chevron. So I had to look at it, and it's really incredible. So both Rabbi Reuven Brand and Rabbi Chaim Marcus, they quote the same piece. So we'll take a look at, to answer to the best that we can, all of these interesting questions. Again, why Chevron to pray if we have Jerusalem, or assuming we have the inkling to go to Jerusalem? Why are we having these giants there? If it's a place of holiness, why do these terrible people, why are they there? Why are we referencing them? We mentioned this idea of the light, only when the light goes onto Chevron, that's when we begin the service in the temple. And we just recently, the last question was, the source of marriage comes from the buying of the burial plot, which again, the whole thing is shrouded in mystery. Why did Abraham, why did he choose Chevron to bury Sarah? You could read the story as it was just a tragic loss. He didn't know what to do, so he just found the closest area. But there needs seemingly there needs to be something more significant, because he doesn't discover it, or maybe he does. But either way, Adam and Chava were also buried there prior. So there must have been something significant from the beginning of history, or the beginning of time, to understand this. We have to better understand what is the significance of Chevron. So as I mentioned, we're going to touch on a little bit of history, and then we'll return to the Torah. So I mentioned this in Rabbi Axelrod in his article in the Southern Israelite mentioned what he called the Abraham's oak. So there's a lot of mystery about it. I mentioned it also because it's in this week's parsha that Avraham is sitting be'olonei Mamre, and there is this legend that there's an oak tree that's situated about 2 kilometers southwest of Mamre, near Chevron, and this is the same tree that Abraham sat under, the Eshel Avram, the tree of Avram that he sat under. The myth has it that when he entertained these 3 guests that were really angels that appeared to him as men. You can see a number of different pictures of the tree 1912, there's a picture here of it. And you can see a picture of the Chevron yeshiva students that are sitting near the tree. As you see their dress, they have these fancy suits, stylish hats. Some of them are wearing bow ties, and very, very interesting that they took these pictures by the Eshel Avram. So obviously, this legend is not new. It must, be quite old, at least 100 years old. Okay, so we keep mentioning these Chevron Yeshiva students. It's kind of a fascination of mine, partially because there's like this interesting cultural mix between the Americans and the students. It's a window into a world that we don't really have any longer, which is the Lithuanian yeshiva, Musar yeshiva specifically. And it's just a very interesting thing because of the window and the picture we get into the city of Chevron. And the Chevron was, pretty much a backwater town that had very little going on. And this yeshiva, when it came, it definitely was a huge boost to the city. And I think we just have a lot of interesting historical pictures, and I think it'll also help us to understand the significance of Chevron. So I want to begin with this story of the Chevron Yeshiva and how it came to be located in Chevron itself. So in 1924, the Lithuanian government decided that yeshivas, I'm just summarizing the story, there's much more we can discuss about it, but basically they changed the policy and decided that yeshiva students needed to study secular studies. There were a number of different responses that some yeshivas had. Some incorporated secular studies, others found ways to avoid it, or maybe they, in some ways, they didn't. They thought maybe they could buy time. Whatever the reasons were, this they felt was an opportune time for the yeshiva to move and to make aliyah to the Holy Land. There was also differences of opinion as to who would be really the leader of the yeshiva. They maintained the yeshiva in Slobodka, even though much of the yeshiva moved to Chevron. And Chevron had a number of older students that were, I guess, close with the leader and basically the picture of the yeshiva and the father figure, the altar of Slobodka, Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel. Eventually, Rav Cheskel Sarna, as I mentioned, becomes the Rosh Yeshiva in 1934. But that's after the yeshiva leaves from Chevron. Why did they pick Chevron? So it's interesting. In the memoirs of Rabbi Cheskel Sarna that I got access to through hearing them from Rabbi Yehuda Geberer, a friend of mine, as I mentioned, a Jewish historian that I often utilize his research. So he writes about the decision that they made to choose Chevron. Really there were like two options. It appears that Yerushalayim would have been the natural choice. But there was a few reasons why Rav Cheskel Sarna writes that they did not want to choose Chevron, Yerushalayim. First of all, there was a dispute between Rav Kook and Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, which we have touched on in the past in our previous lectures, between the old Yishuv and the new Yishuv. And it was just, they didn't want to get involved in this machlokas. They also felt that Yerushalayim would not be the best fit for the Slobodka, modern dressed, clean shaven students of Slobodka. They just thought it may not, be a good fit for the old type of traditionalist type of community that Yerushalayim was. So politically it was messy. Culturally they felt it was not the right exact fit. So what would have been the natural choice would have been, and this may surprise you, but Petach Tikva. Petach Tikva in the Tel Aviv area was really the hub of most of the immigration during that time in the 20s and the 30s, and it was sort of the center of a lot of Jewish communities. Interestingly, you wouldn't know it now, but it was a huge agricultural city. Lots of farming, lots of activity, and you'll soon see that on the Shabbos of the Chevron massacre, many students in the Chevron Yeshiva as it happened in the summer, were on Yeshiva Bein Hazmanim on break, and they were in Tel Aviv or Petach Tikva area. So many of them, many of their lives were saved, but unfortunately not all of them. So the reason why you could imagine they didn't want to be in the center of everything was they tried to create this atmosphere of study and of introspection and concentration, and they didn't want their students to necessarily be in the center of this agricultural economic city. And there was obviously this attraction to this mysterious city, Chevron. It had the Avos, the patriarchs. It was the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. It seems that a lot of the communities found out that the Slobodka Yeshiva was interested in moving, and they all tried to vie for them to come. It was very, it would help the community's economy. It would create a little bit more excitement. So they decided to acquiesce to the community of Chevron's request to move to Chevron. How did they get to Chevron? So apparently they applied for certificates, passports, or in some ways they probably, this was during the time of the 1920s, but they did have the Jewish agency, so they applied to the Jewish agency, and apparently initially the Jewish agency was not so excited to bring this yeshiva over. They really wanted more productive workers. As we mentioned, this was part of that tension of the earliest founding of the state, or even pre-state, but mainly through pressure of Rav Meir Bar Ilan, who was the youngest child of the Netziv, who had close ties to the leadership of the yeshiva. Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein, who I mentioned was the Rosh Yeshiva. For many years they worked together. They traveled to the United States. Rav Meir Bar Ilan prevails on the Jewish agency to grant them their certificates of travel. And at that time, the Jewish agency was headed by Chaim Weizmann, and they apparently got, at the beginning, 100 certificates. Eventually, some of them got their own ways of travel, and they get about 160 or 170 people travel to the yeshiva in Chevron. At the time, there was a family, the Slonim family. They were a very respected family. The father of the Rav Yaakov Yosef Slonim was the chief Ashkenazic rabbi of that city, and his son was Eliezer Dan Slonim, was a highly respected banker, manager of the Chevron branch of the Anglo-Palestine Bank, and the son of the chief rabbi. And he had this community role, that he had these positive relations with the local Arab community. He had the respect of the Jewish people, and he was kind of you could call maybe the community leader in some ways. You can see a picture of him as well, and you see his family and his father. He's the one with the clean-shaven bow tie, circular glasses. You can see at the cornerstone, laying of the cornerstone in the Chevron Yeshiva of Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook is speaking there. The dates don't really seem to add up to me over here. It says 1934, unless it was at the cornerstone laying of the Chevron Yeshiva when it moves to Yerushalayim in a later time. You can see some pictures here of the students learning with the shtenders. You see their white suits, and they're just, you could get a little picture of what it looked like. And you see the Alter of Slobodka sitting there in his older years with the students around him, and eventually he does make his way to Slobodka, but tragically one of the leading Rosh Yeshivas, and who is slated to be his successor, his son, tragically passes away soon afterwards, and this never really, the Alter never really moved on from that. Ratzon Tzvi Finkel never really recovers from that loss of his son, and personal tragedy. Eventually, he moves away from the yeshiva, moves to Tel Aviv, but this is even before the terrible massacre, which now we're going to discuss. So, as I mentioned, there was in 1929. The backstory of it is a little bit complicated. We won't go into all the details, but there was rising tensions. There was tensions at the Kosel, the Western Wall. There was a movement of a mechitza. There was some issues with they didn't allow gathering of prayers at the time, and the tensions between Jews and Palestinians were rising in 1929, and it basically came to a head, and it was called the Shabbos, the Black Shabbos, Black Sabbath, well before the rock band. Black Sabbath, and it was really a tragedy. It was got huge coverage in the media. About 67 unarmed Jewish men, women, and children were murdered. Of the 24, there were 24 yeshiva students in Slobodka who were murdered, and 8 of them were Americans. You can see a picture of those American boys, and we'll read about some of them in a moment. Now, you might ask, how is it possible if 170 people were, made up the yeshiva at least? How could only 24 of them be killed? So, as I mentioned before, the date was in Av. It was in, I get the exact date. I think I had it somewhere here. I think it was like the 2nd of Av or something. I think it was before Tisha B'Av. Sorry, Chai Av. Chai Av, the 18th of Av, after Tisha B'Av, 1929. And as, I guess you could call it, as Hashkacha had it, most of the yeshiva was out on, they weren't in Chevron during that time because it was break. It was Shabbos specifically. Oftentimes in yeshiva, people went away for Shabbos. It was summer break. Who were the people who were not away? Many of them were people who did not have community ties. They didn't have those connections. They were coming from out of town. They were American boys. Another reason why many of the people in the yeshiva were not there that Shabbos was because there was a simcha, some sort of either a Sheva Brachos or a wedding, as I mentioned, in the Tel Aviv area, and many of the students went away for that Shabbos, for that simcha. To give you a sense of these really incredible young men who we know a little bit about them because there were letters that were discovered. I read from one of them. Letters were discovered years later. So let's read a little bit about Aaron David, or Dave Scheinberg. Dave's journey from Memphis was an incredible story. He was enrolled in the Wharton Business School at University of Pennsylvania, and he made some close friends with the Jewish students there. And when he returned to Memphis following his freshman year, he was inspired by Rabbi Baccarat. I don't know who this Rabbi Baccarat was, but he inspired this Dave to not return back to Wharton. And for the next 2 years, he decided to study Torah day and night at Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, Reitz, in New York. In 1927, he enrolls in New York University, taking some English literature classes, but still learning at Reitz. But at a certain point, Dave felt he was ready for the next step. And he decides to move his spiritual home to Chevron. Now, he writes, we actually have many of his letters that he wrote home, which gives us a picture. A historian or writer, Yardena Schwartz, who recently published a book called Ghosts of a Holy War, the 1929 massacre in Palestine that ignited the Arab-Israeli conflict. So she writes, based on many of Dave's letters, about the rising tensions in the land of Israel, I guess you call it Mandate Palestine. So he writes to his mother about the growing tensions about 4 days before the massacre. And he writes, Yerushalayim has been in a state of constant excitement and tension for 10 months now. And Tisha B'Av, this tension reached almost the breaking point. And Tisha B'Av was 11 days before, 11 days, no, not 11 days, 18 minus 9.
Minus 9.
9, sorry, thank you. 9 days before the massacre. Thank you. We need that, Jerry. Appreciate it. So, I'm just trying to see what we have time for here. Many of the students they thought if they went to this fellow Eliezer Don Slunim's house, they would be safe because he was this respected community leader. He had ties with all the Arab communities, and they were promised by the police that they would protect them. And in fact, the Slunim family was entirely murdered, besides for one baby who survived. and in fact, most of the people in that house were murdered as well. I guess you could take a look at source number 10. By 8 a.m. on Black Shabbos, the streets of Chevron were filled with some 3,000 Arab men from Chevron and neighboring villages, armed with swords, daggers, hatchets, butcher knives, iron bars, and wooden sticks. Rioters marched through the streets, calling on Arab residents still inside their homes to join them. Many in the crowd waved their swords in the air, chanting, "Slaughter the Jews." In the house of Rabbi Samarik, David Scheinberg was doing what he must have believed was the only thing he could do at the sound of the slaughter floated to the houses from every direction. Together with the rabbi and his housemates Benjamin Hurwitz, Tzvi Freuman, David prayed. At first, the furniture David and his housemates propped up against the heavy front door kept the mob out, until they discovered that they could tear the shutters off the windows. Rioters dragged 73-year-old Rabbi Samarik outside, beating and stabbing him to death. Just keeps going more tragic and more tragic. And later on, it was discovered that Dave was established an entire tzedakah charity fund for all the less fortunate students. And many of his letters, he was asking his parents to send clothing and to send money. Said that he doled out and bought things for the other students. Okay, we're going to stop that story for now for a moment, learn some Torah, and then we'll return back to a little bit more about Dave and another incredible student in Chevron who was tragically killed, Yaakov or Jackie Wexler. So we asked a number of questions, which I'd like to address now: the holiness of the city of Chevron and to understand its significance. And this is a piece in source number 12, which is a window into, I think, an approach to the city of Chevron, which I think in some way will point to a direction of how we are to understand this tragedy. So, as we mentioned, we're not going to go through all the questions. We'll go through just his approach. He tries to address, again, why. I guess we'll go through one or two of the questions. Why pray in Chevron, and what is the significance of these giants? What's the significance of Chevron? So he says something very interesting. He says, we'll start with I'll start with the most radical source of all. The most radical source is, he says that we dive into Yerushalayim when we pray. We pray towards the Mizrach. However, the tefillos, that those prayers go up through Chevron. He cites this from a Kabbalistic source, the Megala Amukos. And he says, we have to understand, why is it that these prayers go through Ma'aras HaMachpelah and go up to Shemayim through that direction if we're the place that we're supposed to pray towards is Yerushalayim? And his answer is something very, very interesting. Rav Moshe Wolfson explains that Yerushalayim and Chevron, heim be'emes inyon echad. They are a mirror image of each other. One of them, he says, is a revealed. It's a revealed type of kedusha, a revealed holiness, and one is a hidden holiness. But both relate to the eternal connection that the Jewish people have with God. Yerushalayim is the revealed. That's what the word means. Yireh Shalem. It means it appears to be whole. But Chevron, and Moshe Wolfson plays upon the words, the names in creative ways. He says Chevron is related to the word of chibur, connection, but also is related to the word churban, destruction. Chevron is the eternal connection that the Jewish people have with God and with the land, even in a state of churban, even in a state of destruction. And he says that is why Avraham chooses to bury Sarah in this place, because it is the place that is a eternal connection, perfect for someone who just lost his wife. He's in a state of churban, in a state of destruction, but he needs to find that place that maintains a connection even in a state of destruction. And he says this is why Chevron is connected to the Avos, our patriarchs and our matriarchs, in the state of not being alive. They're the opposite of living, but they are still connected because the connection between the Avos and the land is a chibur, it is a connection between the neshama and the guf, between the body and the soul. And that's why he says it's called Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the doubled cave. Why is it doubled? It's the cave inside the cave. It's the connection you see when you don't see a connection. And he writes, really, because at the end, when you go to Chevron or we go to Ma'aras HaMachpelah, now we actually have access to it much more than we used to, you don't see anything. There's really nothing there. It's just this building. He says you see nothing on the surface. But then you have to go underneath. Everything lies underneath because it's all beneath the surface. Beneath the appearance of destruction, there lies the Kedusha. There lies the connection. And this is why he says that Kalev goes to Chevron. Why does Kalev go to Chevron? Because he's trying to pray to combat the Meraglim. What were the Meraglim trying to do? They were basically the source of the destruction of Yerushalayim, because the Meraglim were trying to badmouth and destroy the hopes and dreams of the Jews of the land of Israel. And the Jews cry, and when we have a tradition, they cried on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the day that the temple was destroyed. So we can't go to Yerushalayim to pray, because this is the destruction of Yerushalayim. Where do you go to find strength when there's Churban, when there's destruction? You go to the Chevron. And that is why the avoda begins when the light shines over Chevron, because it always emerges, this twin relationship between Yerushalayim and Chevron that's kind of this mirror image of the revealed and the hidden. Rabbi Moshe Wolfson calls it the connection, this eternal connection we have with the land and with Hashem. Yerushalayim is Galia, it's revealed, and Chevron is Iskasia, Bebchinas Iskasia, and the hidden Anochi Haster Aster. It's a double language. That's the same as the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. This doubling, which means it's beneath the surface. You see in the initial appearance of it, you have four giants, these terrible negative spiritual energies. But that's the first thing that you see. But the deeper understanding of Chevron is, even though there's this destruction, there is this eternal chibur, this eternal connection. And perhaps that's why the link towards marriage and this connection between Kicha Miste Ephron, because marriage is an eternal bond, that it's not about the externalities. You give this ring and you'd say, oh, I'm buying, this marriage is happening through money. That doesn't make any sense. How does this even effectuate holiness? You have to look from a Chevron perspective. You have to understand that there's deep connections that are built, even though on the surface of it, it doesn't appear to be something that's significant. Underneath that, underneath the surface, underneath the Churban, there is this Kedusha. I don't know if this is the case. Apparently the altar after his son died, before the tragedy of the massacre, the altar of Sabaka felt this is the wrong place for us to be. We shouldn't have come here to begin with. It's too holy of a place. I don't know. I can't explain it. I don't understand why these terrible things happen, and I'm not trying to, explain away the tragedy. But I will, I guess, there is a picture that sort of emerged from these sources, which is that there is Churban, there is tragedy, there is this history of this holiness. At the same time, there is this history of this tragedy within the city. More than that, I can't really say. But returning to this Rabbi Axelrod, we saw his article in the beginning from the Southern Israelite. He leaves about 2 weeks before the massacre in 1929, and he goes back to America. And then he finds out on the front page of the newspapers, he sees his friends. He says, Dave, Billy, Jackie, and the rest, they were all murdered. And he says he walked around in Manhattan mechanically as if in a trance. He was ill for several days. Couldn't think of anything else. He says, magnificent structures, vast and towering, they left me cold. My thoughts turned to a small, modest building in Chevron, whose walls even now were moist with the blood of my colleagues. Yeshiva walls, Kosle HaBeis Medrash. I'll just finish with one last picture, or you could call them a portrait of an incredible person, young, killed died way before his time. Yaakov Wexler, known as Jackie. Yaakov Wexler, his short life is really an incredible lesson of Emunah. In the 1920s, Rabbi Yaakov Volk, he visited Chicago on behalf of the fledgling yeshuv in Chevron, and he met his fellow Yerachmiel Wexler, who was a wealthy member of the Chicago Jewish community, and he was so impressed with his Rabbi Volk, he decides to travel to the Holy Land in 1928 with his family, and they go around, and they purchase some land, and they're very inspired, and the Wexlers visit Chevron, and they're just taken by the city, and Rav Volk convinces, the son, Yaakov, says, I want to learn here, I want to study here, there's American boys here, I want to, he wants to study in the Chevron Yeshiva, and his father reluctantly agrees to let his 16-year-old Yaakov study in the yeshiva. Apparently we have testimony that the fateful August day of Chai Av, Yaakov hid, and then just dawned on me now, Chai Av, right? Chai is life, because the Chevron, there is this, even within the destruction, there is this life. Yaakov was, along with many others, hid in the house of Eliezer Don Slonim, as we mentioned before, murdered with everyone there. And apparently we have testimony that he said to Rav Sokolover, who was another rabbi who we mentioned him before. I think we mentioned him. That was Rabbi Samari. They mentioned to a different rabbi that if he's going to die, he said, I'm happy that it will have been after being joined by a group of B'nai Torah. Basically, thank you for letting me be part of this incredible yeshiva. And Rav Volk was beside himself with grief when he found out that Yaakov Wexler died, and he felt responsible. He felt he was responsible for encouraging this boy to, or the boy wanted to, but he was the one who brought this family from Chicago to Chevron, and he avoided going back to to Chevron to inspire the community. He avoided Chicago to go back and to speak there because he didn't want to see Mr. Wexler. He felt so embarrassed and so broken. But at one point, this fellow Yerachmiel Wexler travels to New York, and he bumps into this Rabbi Volk. And Mr. Wexler, who had lost his son, right, that years before, it doesn't say when this was, but I guess it was pretty recently, he says, Rabbi Volk, we missed your wonderful talks in Chicago. When will you be returning? And, Rabbi Volk is just stammering, doesn't know what to say, and emotional, and he felt so broken and so responsible. And with tears in his eyes, he replies to Mr. Wexler. He says, I feel so responsible for your son going to Chevron, and I've been avoiding you as a result. And Mr. Wexler replies, and this is just like you see this power of the city and these incredible boys who inspired their families as well. The father says, you are wrong for feeling guilty. Just the opposite. I owe you much thanks. There was a heavenly decree placed on my son that he live until the age of 17. He could have died in New York in a car accident or in Chicago from illness. As a result of your efforts, he came to Eretz Yisrael and died learning Torah in Chevron. He died because he was a Jew, and there could be no nobler death than that. The story is tragic. The boys were really just incredible. You could see it in the stories that they tell about them. And I think it goes along with this mirror image we mentioned that Rav Moshe Wolfson said, that Yerushalayim has this outright holiness, and Chevron, unfortunately, in some ways has this Churban, it has this destruction. But there was this rebirth and connection and spiritual awakening. You can see a picture of the Chevron Yeshiva students. Now it's in Givat Mordechai in Yerushalayim. Thousands of students that are studying there. And I just think it's a window into, although it's a tragic episode, but it's a window into this incredible flourishing of this Torah community in Chevron, even if it was shortly lived. But it eventually, they leave. The community leaves, the yeshiva leaves, and they rebuild in other places. But Chevron, what it means to us and what it means to our people is this eternal connection. The connection we have is skasia, with hiddenness, the place where it is a connection beyond the body. It is a spiritual connection of chibur, of soul and body and soul. It is the core and the source of the kedusha of Yerushalayim in some way, because the tefillos go up from there. So even though even when there is a Beis Hamikdash, the connection to the avos, to the patriarchs, to the matriarchs, is still there, because again, it's an eternal connection that is always there, regardless of what it appears on the surface. I don't know if that captures it, pointing towards a picture of this mysterious city, as all the cities are in Yerushalayim, in Eretz Yisrael. There's just so much to unpack, so much to understand. This was just a little window into what the Torah has to say about Chevron, what the history of Chevron and the tragic story of the massacre in 1929. Okay, we'll hold it here, and I'm not sure what we'll do next week. We'll have to decide.